All right, in this video, we're gonna see if we can get this engine fired up. Got to put a couple more things on the bottom first, and then we'll come up here and put the intake on. Underneath the car, I'm gonna put the hydraulic pump on. This bolt that's underneath this hose right here, you have to work that down as you're tightening them all in, because otherwise, if you don't, when you tighten it in, it's going to push up against that hose, and I've seen people actually break that hose. So it's kind of time consuming to walk that one down, but if you take your time, it's not too bad. Okay, this is the oil filter I'm going to use, CM6731-FL820. It's a Ford Racing filter. This is one of the best filters that I've used. You can feel it's just physically heavy. It has an anti-drain back valve in it. I'm also going to put this little gauge on there where the oil sending unit would normally go, so I can see how much oil pressure we got when we first fire it up. Put a little bit of oil on the O-ring. Okay, back under the car, we put our oil filter on. I had to put a elbow on here to be able to clear the engine. And when I put those on, when you use these pipe fittings, I like to use liquid pipe sealer instead of the Teflon tape, because I don't like the idea of the tape coming loose or coming apart and then going through the oiling system. Now we can attach our gauge. Okay, while we're in this area here, we need to put this ground strap on the stud for the motor mount. Very important that you have a good ground strap from your engine to your chassis. Without this, your car probably won't start. And we also got this ground strap that goes directly to the chassis. You put that on there as well. Okay, now we can put our crank position sensor in. Now we can bolt our AC compressor up. Now we can plug in our AC pigtail. Up on the top of the engine, the main thing we got to get to is put the intake manifold on. But before we can do that, we need to put this coolant tube in. Put a little bit of PB blaster on there to help go on. I'm going to use the bolt that I got to lift the engine up, put that in there. It has to be secured, otherwise it could get blown off. Now that the tube is secure, attach the hose to it. Take the tape off. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the spark plugs in. These are NGK TR55s. Yeah, those spark plugs only get torqued to about 10 foot-pounds, so you don't have to over torque them. Don't go too tight on them, especially if you don't have the 9-thread heads, which were on the later PI, or if you have the time certs. Now we're ready to move on to the intake manifold. Now we can put our bolts in. There are these longer ones, those are going to go into the thermostat housing. Before you tighten them all down, it's a good idea to go through, make sure that there's nothing pinched in between there, like you don't have any wires or anything like that. Once it's all clear, go ahead and tighten it down. One of the things that made this intake easier to go on was because we didn't have the EGR tube on there. So we can go ahead and take the EGR off now. In its place, we got this little delete plate. This one actually has a cool little horse on it. Now we're going to attach this coolant tube to the intake. Now put the coil packs back in. Now I'm going to go through and start connecting some of the electrical, the injectors, the coils, the throttle position, IAC, things like that. Now I'm going to do the throttle cable and bracket. Okay, try to get a closer look at the way this throttle cable goes on here. The cruise control, if your car has it, it's easy, it just snaps right down on there. The throttle cable goes up through this groove, and then this the pin fits in that hole. Sometimes it's easier to do if you pull the throttle open and then guide the cable through there and then push the pin into the hole. I'm going to put a new water pump on here. This is the Gates part number 42065. This is the one with the long nose. The 96 to 01 used these. 01 to 04 used the shorter snout. Put a little bit of PB Blaster on the O-ring here, make it go in a little easier. Now the water pump pulley. Now we can do our idler and our tensioner arm. Now I put the alternator on. First I'm going to put the bottom bolts in. Now we can put the accessory belt on. Now we can do the bracket for our hydraulic pump reservoir. And we can do our little RF modulators, radio frequency modulators. Connect the alternator. One note on this alternator, this is a power line right here. You could either go above or below this bracket. I've actually seen these to where when they were installed below it, and it rubbed through and it actually started to short out right there. So however you route it, just make sure that it's not rubbing on the bracket. Now we can put our vacuum line on there. We took off some of the electrical items, so we have to put some plugs on these. Okay, so there's 3 connections over there that would normally be plugged into electrical items. I'm just going to jam one of these M8 screws into each of them, and that'll seal it up. Okay, before we move on to the cooling system, this is the support brace for the degas bottle. I thought I was done with underneath the car, but I'm going to go ahead and put this thing in. And now we're ready to put the radiator and electric fan back in. I don't know how I got that thing out of there without removing the battery or anything, but I'm going to remove the battery and see if it gives me more clearance. Well, I'm not going to be able to get the battery tray out because that bottom bolt is so rusted that I can't get any bite on it. I have to be able to get it in there. I have to be able to have gotten it in there because I got it out. All right, my pep talk worked. I got it back in there. Now I'll just put the brackets on, put the 2 bolts for the tray that I took out. Again, I thought I was done underneath the car, but now I gotta go underneath there and put the lower radiator hose on. Not sure if you can see it in the camera or not, but I'm gonna do this trans cooler line before I get this hose on. I feel like I can get better access to it. Now I connect the fuel line. Now I can attach the evap hose. Now put the intake on. And before I tighten this down, I'm going to run the PCV hose. And now the other side of the PCV. I can put the upper radiator hose on. Now I can put the expansion tank in. Now I'm going to add engine oil, coolant, and trans oil. Now reconnect the battery. Okay, before I try and start it, I like to hold the throttle wide open and turn the engine over a few times to try and build up some oil pressure. When you hold the throttle wide open, it tells the PCM not to fire the injectors. So I'll do that a few times You don't want to hold the starter on for too long at once because it can burn up the wires and the starter and stuff. But I'm going to hit it for a few seconds, turn it off, hit it for a few seconds, turn it off. Here we go. Well, it looks like it got a trans line leak going on here, but all in all, it's alive. It was showing about 70 psi of oil when it was running, so I'd say that's a good sign. It's alive.